My name is Tim, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Lachlan.
Howdy.
And Ruben.
Hey.
For those listening who do not have the displeasure of seeing my head, I'm wearing my Oktoberfest hat today because it's the last day of October, and we were in COVID lockdown during Oktoberfest, which is one of my favourite things of the year. So I have a nice big stein of ale and my red Oktoberfest hat on, and I'm going to enjoy that. What are you drinking, Lachlan?
Mate, I've got a bit of Captain Morgan's in ginger beer, so what I'm doing.
Oh, lovely.
And Ruben?
I'm doing a Furphy again.
That's actually what I'm drinking.
Oh, there you go.
So
I had Furphy in the fridge. We could have had the trifecta here.
Well, you could have just said that's what you were drinking and told a Furphy.
Nice one. Hey, I bought it in cans this time though because it was the same price, and tinnies are $3.75 and the bottles are $3.30.
Oof.
Does it taste the same in a can as what it does in a bottle, though? Is what I ask you.
I don't know. I don't feel like it does, but I've always thought that that's got to be psychological. Because why would it taste any different?
But you know what? It does though, because it's like if you had Coke, remember old Coke in a bottle. It tastes so much different than a out of a can. Don't know.
The only way I can explain it maybe is that smell is a component of taste. So maybe you can like smell the aluminium or something, and it changes the flavor.
It could be. I reckon you might be onto something there.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I'll also add to the argument that when you're at a pub, a VB out of the tap into a nice cold glass is quite drinkable, but a VB out of a tin is garbage.
Most beers taste better on tap, though. I don't know why.
It's true. Speaking of which, I had my first tap beer in months last week, which I sent you a little snippet of just to rub it in a little bit. Went back to the office for the first time and went out with some people for a beer at lunch, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Yeah.
Well, I got to enjoy some Korean barbecue,
Nice.
which was delicious, and that was after watching a musical, which I'll probably talk about in the pub for lots of us if we have time, called Come From Away. And I was concerned it would be a sermon from the left, but I'll give you the spoiler alert at the end of the show.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. You've given no foreshadowing as to your review of it, so I am awaiting with bated breath.
Well, I'll review it at the end of the show. So let's kick off. Let's quickly review what happened last week. I think you summarised that quite well before we jumped on Lachlan. Do you want to quickly just give that a quick overview?
Yeah, sure, mate. So really, like we finished up last week and talking about philosophy, shockingly, with Socrates, who's making the case that the pure philosophy is a benefit to the state, but that most of the philosophers that everyone is sort of seeing are these sort of pretenders who are being deemed basically either useless or strange monsters, was kind of the way that they were putting it. And I guess like the last thing they really sort of spoke about was the fact that Glaucon's asking, is there a state that exists right now that could utilize philosophy to better run that state? And they basically sort of said, no, there's no current state that would, we could sort of step into this. So they ask again, so is this the case where this ideal state that we're coming up with, is that the state where philosophy can rule and make a difference? And Socrates sort of gets to the point of saying, well, it's the definition is not quite complete, so we need to sort of ask a difficult question in order to make that clear. So that's kind of where we kick off now, because that question is how the study of philosophy will be made so ordered so that will not ruin the state. And our friend Socrates says he's going to argue this with zeal, is the way he put it.
Yes. He did. Well, I think that's a good summary. Okay, so I'm just reaching for my outline for today because it's a little bit
That's all right.
complicated.
I think from here, they started off talking about the education of children as a starting point, because they're sort of saying that philosophy is not really, as it sort of stands now, it's something that people do in their spare time between learning other crafts and skills, and it's not really given, I think, in Socrates' kind of viewpoint, the center stage that perhaps it should in someone's education. I guess he's sort of saying it's not really pursued with particular care, and it's viewed as kind of a bit of a hobby. And even those people with the right kind of attitude to become a philosopher, it's not pursued like another business or something like that. And he's saying that by the time they get too old, the spark of philosophy and the beauty of it is lost on those old people who haven't grown up with its touch. So he's basically sort of saying that we should be teaching it like gymnastics for the soul, which I suppose fits in with some of the discussion he's been having about like the building of our guardians and all that kind of thing, and this sort of balance that they're sort of seeking.
Yeah.
And he just kind of wants to start off with those simple concepts with the kids, and then they can sort of gradually step them into more advanced topics as they get older. And I think the real sort of like beauty bit that he's sort of like trying to wrap that up with is as you get, older late in life and you can no longer do any physical labor, that you can step in to become a philosopher then at that point in time of your life and be able to transition to that, because you've studied it all your life. You should still have that spark, whereas not in the current model, I guess, is what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of that part. You're muted, Ruben.
Yeah.
There you go.
I guess roughly what they say. I'm not sure whether it comes up later or not. My memory's a little bit sketchy of this chapter because it gets into metaphysics later, and I was trying to get my head around it before we jumped on, so I'm fried. But yeah, it kind of ties into later where he's saying that when you're choosing these rulers, you want them to tick all these boxes. So you want them to be courageous and all that sort of gear. So my reading on that is basically, well, we want them to work on their bodies and their physique when they're younger, and then not take on the full philosophic training until they're older. The idea being that, I guess, almost like they'll have a bit of life experience. They'll have then actually had the time to go through all those elaborate tests that they referred to a couple of chapters back before they sort of full on take that philosophic route.
Yeah, I think you're right. But he's also trying to just sort of like pad the way to make sure that it's in their minds as part of whatever else they're doing, but without, like you're sort of saying, maybe
without overloading them.
Yeah, but having enough there so that when they are ready to sort of step into that role, that it's still of sort of interest and relevant and all that sort of thing.
I thought it was pretty reasonable what he was explaining, but then they go on to say that Adamantha says that, that's a pretty bold statement, Socrates. I don't entirely know why he thought it was bold, but
maybe that's a translation thing.
It could be.
Our translation says, "How truly in earnest you are, Socrates."
Yeah, no, he's sort of saying that he's like painted a beautiful picture, and I think maybe that was a little tongue in cheek in that it just looks so ideal.
Too perfect.
Yeah, maybe it's just such a high, lofty ideal there.
Actually, that makes sense of it, because then he goes, but I think that the majority of your audience will all be bolder to contradict you and remain quite unconvinced, not the least Thrasymachus. So he brings back in Thrasymachus or Thrasymachus or whatever his name is. I love Socrates' response. He's like, now don't start a quarrel between me and Thrasymachus when we've just become such good friends.
Yeah,
not that we're heard of you before. Yeah, no, it is pretty funny.
But then he goes on to lay it on even thicker, and he's like, and if we don't agree, he basically goes, if we don't agree, I want to leave the door open to discuss it into the next life.
Yeah.
It's like, even if I can't convince him now, we'll be dead or reincarnated, and I'll keep trying.
You can just see Thrasymachus' face just going, "Oh man, this guy just kills me.
This guy's killing me. I wish I never said anything.
Even when I'm dead, he's going to pursue me."
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're not wrong. So once they finish mucking around with Thrasymachus, um, they talk about the classic socialism argument that well, the perfect philosophical example has never existed. So, do we want to quote that or just discuss it?
I've got a quick quote if you want to.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. He's just sort of saying that they haven't seen a true philosopher before. So, no, my friend, and they have seldom, if ever, heard free and noble sentiments such as men utter when they are earnestly and by every means in their power seeking after truth for the sake of knowledge, while they look coldly on their subtleties of controversy, of which the end is opinion and strife, wherever they meet with them in the courts of law and in society. So basically, he's just sort of said that until there's a state led by a true philosopher, or a king is like divinely inspired by a true love of philosophy, that no one's going to be able to recognize it because they've never seen such a thing before.
Yeah. Do you think that's a dig at the current rulers, or is he just earnestly saying this is a new model that's not really been a thing before?
No, I think he's constantly digging at the current rulers, man.
It's kind of column A, column B. I mean, it's. I think he's frustrated with the esteem with which the philosophers are held with, right? Because like clearly he sort of sees that that's not valued as highly as what it should, and I guess he's getting accused of that early on by was it Glaucon or Adamantus sort of like pulls him up when he starts talking about the philosopher being a leader of the state. And so saying, careful, pretty bold statements you're kind of throwing out here. And look, I don't know. I mean, he's certainly got some bias, but, I don't know. At the same time, I think he is being somewhat earnest. He is biased, though, but I think he means it well, though, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think so. He thinks he's speaking from a place of truth there.
Yeah. So then they start talking about like the people and whether they would accept such a leader sort of coming into it, because there's obviously not something that's ever been done before, right? So I think they start talking about this is that whole thing about is it even possible?
Yeah, I'm happy to read a quote about that.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I'll just start from here, and if I should have started earlier, you guys can add to it afterwards. And this was what we foresaw, and this was the reason why truth forced us to admit, not without fear and hesitation, that neither cities nor states nor individuals will ever attain perfection until the small class of philosophers whom we termed useless but not corrupt are providentially compelled, whether they will or not, to take charge of the state, care of the state, and until a like necessity be laid on the state to obey them, or until kings, or if not kings, the sons of kings or princes, are divinely inspired with a true love of true philosophy. That either or both these alternatives are impossible, I see no reason to affirm. If they were so, we might indeed be justly ridiculed as dreamers and visionaries. Am I not right? So he's saying it's whilst we haven't seen it, it's in theory plausible that it can happen.
Yeah, and I think they basically sort of start talking about the way that they've discussed it and how reasonable it sounds. And it's just like, well, it actually sounds reasonable when we start talking it through. So is it a matter of just trying to open people's eyes to the concept of it? Because whilst it sounds unfamiliar, when you start talking about it, it actually makes some sense from their viewpoint.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Timmy, though? You referred to it as the socialism argument, referring to the fact that sometimes when you bring up the negative aspects of socialism, people just sort of say, well, it hasn't been done right yet. So what are your thoughts on this explanation?
Well, it is a bit easy to say, oh, it hasn't been done right yet. But I don't know.
Although I suppose in this circumstance, he's not saying it hasn't been done right yet. They're saying the only reason people don't like the idea is because they haven't seen it yet. And it's like, well, that's kind
Yeah,
of. You'd have to see it. But,
yeah. I wouldn't say that we have not seen it at a level. I will say this. The argument for socialism is it hasn't been done right yet. The argument for the philosophy king is it was done right once, but not to perfection, which would be Marcus Aurelius. That like I think.
you're talking now, not back then.
Yeah,
not
correct.
at the time they're saying this. But
yeah, so I'd
point,
say that this idea has some merit because it was applied at some level, somewhat successfully. I can't say the same for socialism.
Yeah, look, I think the way that they're talking about it. I can understand their sort of argument. The thing is, like this whole thing is really a thought experiment, and it's not
Yeah.
really about implementing. Well, sorry, I suppose it's about planting a seed is really what it's about, and having people think differently, and that's the object of a thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
And
I kind of reconciled it with myself. I like the idea of it being painted as an ideal that you would aim at, knowing that you're not going to hit it, which I think they kind of still in that realm. But at this point, Socrates is pretty confident that like it could work in reality. I'm not really on board with that. I don't think what he's describing could work on reality, but I don't think that in reality, I don't think that disqualifies it as an ideal to aim at, though. So I prefer leaving it in that category. I don't like this idea of them sort of saying, yeah, but it could work. It could work. I'm not convinced that it could.
The way they've described it there, I don't think it sounds practical or useful. In a little bit, they talk a bit further about the fact that in the ideal state that they're talking about, wrapping it up with in the role of a guardian who's got that balance. That's actually someone who's different to kind of what this sounds like, if you know what I mean.
Oh, you think so?
Well, only because they're being a warrior, right? And they talk about the unusual, balance in trying to find someone who's, strong and strategic, but is also, a philosopher. And that's a pretty rare find.
And they say that, don't they?
Yeah, I think what they're trying to sort of say is that if we want to try and find these people, we need to set them up for a bit more success, I suppose, in the way that we structure our society to encourage people to have more sort of development and focus on philosophy, because at the moment no one really gives a damn about it, and you're not going to find those people who could be those real diamonds in the rough because there's no opportunity for them to kind of realize that. It's like, I guess that's the way I could kind of cop it. That hypothetical of having the warrior philosopher who's, gained all this experience through both sort of sides of things in their career, and getting into their sort of wizened years and being able to, I don't know, look at those things probably would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so. And if you think about it just from our perspective these days, if who you'd want to vote for, imagine if you did have someone who was an ex-soldier, some kind of war hero, who then went and got all his degrees, or the equivalent of philosophy these days, I suppose, would be a couple of degrees in whatever, and then maybe ran a successful business, done all of these things, and then he becomes the leader of the country. You can kind of see how that would be the kind of person you'd want to follow. Not just a career politician or not just a businessman, but somebody who's done it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that well-rounded experience, right?
Yeah, and once again, that would be, like you say, a diamond in the rough, that almost, it's a unicorn.
Yeah, they also give examples of bad philosophy straight after that too. So not just people that weren't able to do it, but then people who get into it too soon, or what was the phrase they used? It was a funny phrase. Who rush in uninvited, and they're pretenders. And the reason they are is because they, what is it? I've underlined it. They who make persons instead of things the theme of their conversation.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
like attacking the person rather than talking about the principle.
Yeah.
I think it's getting back onto all the stuff we're talking about in the previous chapters about public opinion and just basically chanting whatever's going to get a popular response and all this sort of thing. So not going after the truth, but just going after what's going to get the right reaction in a political arena or whatever it may well be.
Yeah, so is that why he then moves on to trying to? I might be misreading this, but is this why he talks on to about trying to convince the masses, so to speak, that the philosophers are seeking the truth, and
Yeah, which
that
is
if they
roughly where
perceive that they're saying the truth, then they will accept philosophers and philosophy?
yeah, that's pretty much where they go into the whole, if they saw it and they saw that they were good-willed and they saw the fruits of their labor, so to speak, that people would come around and this state could actually exist.
Yeah, there's a quote around that. For he, Adamantus, whose mind is fixed upon true being, has surely no time to look down upon the affairs of earth or to be filled with malice and envy, contending against men. His eye is ever directed towards things fixed and immutable, which he sees neither injuring nor injured by one another, but all in order moving according to reason. These he imitates, and to these he will, as far as he can conform himself. Can a man help imitating that which he holds reverential converse? Impossible. I actually read the completely wrong one.
Oh, I was about to say I had that bit highlighted too.
I still like it. That's not.
Whoops.
It's not a waste. All right, rewind.
Rewind. Back it up. Sorry, it's only a short one. Who can be at enmity with one who loves them? Who that is himself gentle and free from envy will be jealous of one in whom there is no jealousy. Nay, let me answer for you that in a few this harsh temper may be found, but not in the majority of mankind. So I think that's what he was just sort of saying about people's opinions. How can you be upset with somebody who you can see is just earnestly trying to work for the benefit of everyone else, without going after their money or their whatever else it is? Like, I'm trying to seek something better rather than your stuff or whatever it may well be.
Do you think it's a bit like he cops a lot of crap, and that's what he's doing? So is he saying here that he cops crap because people don't understand he's pursuing truth?
I think you're probably right, because I suspect he is a very unique individual compared to maybe a lot of the other philosophers at the time. Because, and I know we've spoken about this before, but I mean, he is the one who sort of like walks away from the trappings. And because I guess, like, you put it this way, right? If he was just going to go around and tour and do these sort of chats and stuff for people, he could probably be a pretty wealthy man if he really was sort of motivated by wealth or power or whatever it may well be, right?
No doubt.
Hey, just on that. I don't know, did you guys get a chance to have a look at the Apology?
No.
Which is it's another. It doesn't matter if you didn't, but just on that very very same subject, in his speech, because he gives a speech before they kill him, like it's basically a court case.
I did hear some of it. Yeah. Sorry, go.
Yeah, and he gives a speech in his own defense, so it's called the Apology. It's one of the Platonic dialogues or whatever. But yeah, there's a part where in that he explicitly basically says what you're just talking about. He goes, "I could have gone into politics," but he basically says, "But I didn't, because if I had have, you would have killed me a long time ago." So he's like, so rather than put my head on the chopping block, and he roughly says what he says back in that chapter before, where he says, rather than put my head on the chopping block and don't benefit anyone, he said, I chose to speak to individuals and pass on knowledge and let them decide what to do with it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too, like, he puts himself out there as being a very plain speaking and simple kind of guy. I'm just a man in this universe trying to make my way, as I think the infamous words of Django Fett may well have been. But
that just reminded me of that song, I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude. I know who I am. Anyway, sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, and after I read the apology, I went through the one that comes right before that. It's called Euthyphro. And what that is he basically stops in the corridor before he goes and gives his speech. That his head's on the chopping block and he goes to his speech. All in the corridor on the way in, he has a chat to this bloke called Euthyphro, and and there's like this whole other dialogue where he's kind of not arguing with the bloke, but doing that typical thing of, well, I don't know what it is. You tell me what it is, and then when they tell him what it is, he just picks it apart. And that one's classic. It's really short, and by the end of it, this Euthyphro bloke just like walks off. He just go. He's like, nah, I'm out. He just walks off.
Wow.
He just cracks his shits and walks off. It's so funny. So you can just like it's hilarious because he's set up in this court case. They're talking about exile or execution, and he still stops to piss this guy off in the foyer on the way into the courtroom.
You get that feeling. He would be that guy at the barbecue that you just like sitting and having a beer, and the guy's starting to walk over towards you. Go, damn man, again.
He'd always be the guy getting skull dragged out of the pubs and nightclubs for starting trouble.
Yeah. But in fairness to him, I think he has dedicated himself to this life, and right or wrong, I think he's tried to do it as right as he can in the pursuit of what he thinks is right and just and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, he practices what he preaches.
Yeah, it doesn't mean he's right, but he's certainly putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak.
So what did you guys think of it once he goes into... All right, so we are pursuing the truth, essentially. So he gives this analogy around... they'll begin by taking the state and the manners of men, from which, as from a tablet, they will rub out the picture and leave a clean surface. This is no easy task, but whether easy or not, herein will lie the difference between them and every other legislator. They have nothing to do either with individual state, and will inscribe no laws until they have either found or themselves made a clean surface. It's like, yeah, okay. But then he's like, when they're filling in the work, as I conceive, they will often turn their eyes upwards and downwards. I mean that they'll first look at absolute justice and beauty and temperance, and again at the human copy, and will mingle and temper the various elements of life into the image of a man, and thus they will conceive according to that other image, which, when existing among men, Homer calls the form and likeness of God. What did you guys think of that? Do you recall that part?
Well, yeah. I mean, the start's pretty clear. He's just sort of saying that, they should wipe whatever constitution is there, and rather than trying to sort of bastardize it by chopping and changing bits, just to toss the whole thing out and start fresh, which is definitely what Socrates is sort of like talking about with this state, and saying you need to, not keep adopting things and to start over again. The second part, I think there's something that they talk about a little bit further on that might sort of give light to it, where he's sort of talking about how I think you want to make sure that you're setting your ideals on the absolute best possible example, and that you might fail to reach that. And instead he's sort of saying that maybe they start looking at that, and then they start thinking, oh, that's probably too hard for man, so they set the bar a bit lower. It's kind of the vibe.
Right. Okay.
And that they're trying to, rather than sort of aiming for what would please the gods and really be the ultimate sort of way to try and approach that society, let's bend that to something that we think's more tangible for man.
I thought what it was implying there was that the standard will be so high, like what you say, is that they'll make a lower benchmark. I think that's the first part. But then I think what he's saying is they'll then project that man level to be the God level. So then they'll recreate God in man's image, or recreate the ultimate good in the lesser good's image. Is that what you guys got out of that?
That's where I was, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I found that very interesting. But it was a bit... I had to reread it a few times.
Yeah. So they pretty much wrap up that topic there by now really sort of saying that, okay, talking through all that, it seems like it's something that might be possible and could actually be for the best if it were to sort of turn out the way we've sort of talked about. And they pretty much wrap it up. From there, they start talking about how and what studies and pursuits will the saviors of this constitution be created. And so they start talking about like some educational frameworks and stuff like that. So I did have a little quote. I think I've got the right one this time, if you want me to have a go.
All right, let's go for it.
We're saying, as you will remember, that they will be lovers of their country, tried by the test of pleasures and pain, and neither in hardships nor in dangers, nor at any other critical moment were to lose their patriotism. He was to be rejected who failed, but he who always comes forth pure, like gold, tried in the refiner's fire, was to be made a ruler, and to receive honours and rewards in life after death. And so, like, this is where they're just kind of like really summarising what it was that they were going through the processes to find a guardian. And now they're sort of like moving on to sort of saying, okay, that's the basis we've got there. And that guardian should also be a philosopher, which is what we were talking about a little bit before. So this is where they start sort of talking about how difficult it's going to be to try and find this person who's wrapped up with the soul, the philosopher's soul, sort of in there along with the warrior.
Yeah.
So I guess like that from here they're talking about like the parts of the soul again, like they did, but just in an abbreviated manner. And because they were keen to move on, they just kind of all agreed on the outcomes of that. And they're sort of saying, well, did we really dive into that deep enough?
Yeah. They do move on. I'm not sure what to make of that. Have you got anything to add there, Ruben?
Nah, not really. I think they kind of just come to consensus that what Socrates is banging on about is they kind of just essentially say they're satisfied. Yeah, righto, this bloke, he's going to be the leader. He's going to be hard to find. He's going to be rare, but we want him to be a philosopher and want him to tick all these boxes.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing.
So
this next section, are we talking about the good being the ultimate object of knowledge or something? Is that what we're moving on to?
I think that's pretty much next. Yeah,
the knowledge of the good. That reminds me of Morpheus when he's first showing Neo when he's waking up. He's like, "Welcome." What's the era? To the desert of the real. I was like that. It's like the knowledge of the good. Good.
Well, it's pretty funny when he lays this one out, because it wasn't what you kind of thought he was really going to get onto, because he's talking about how this is going to be a knowledge higher than justice and higher than the other virtues. And, immediately you got Glaucon on the edge of his seat. Tell us, Socrates, what is it?
What do you mean there's another one?
Yeah.
He's like,
what is the
higher than justice? And
absolutely. And then it just kind of falls a little bit flat. He's like, oh, well, it's something you really already know. It's the knowledge of good or goodness. You're kind of already aware of this, aren't you, Glaucon? Right?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. He's like, we've already talked about it like several times.
Yeah. Totally puts his mate down.
He's doing a Shyamalan. It's like it was there all along. He wasn't alive. Yeah.
I see dumb people.
So you just talk about like that good is misunderstood and that people don't really know what good means.
Yeah, he posits he basically says a lot of people agree that the good is the highest virtue. But then he says there's two. But then when you ask him, what? Okay, it's the highest thing. Fair enough. What is the good? And he said there's two classes essentially that people subscribe to. One is that the good is pleasure, and the other one is that the good is knowledge. And then he very quickly and handily knocks those two down. Basically, with pleasure, he says, well, it can't. The good can't. The ultimate virtue can't be pleasure because there are pleasures which are bad. You can or or alternatively, you can take pleasure in something that's evil. Therefore, that can't be the ultimate one. So he throws that out, and he says, those that say that the highest good is knowledge. When you ask them what does the good, what is knowledge, then they say, well, knowledge is the good and the good is the knowledge, which is essentially circular. And they both they kind of laugh that off and go, well, that's absurd. Like, that's not a definition. So they're in this position where they're like, where Socrates is saying, well, this is the good is the highest thing. This is what people say it is. And then Glaucon, I think it's Glaucon, says, okay, well, don't stop beating around the bush. Once again, Socrates, just tell us what it is. And he's like, well, I kind of don't really know what it is. And I can't really be sure. And I don't want you to hold me accountable if I'm wrong. Like, he gets real sheepish again. Typically, and Glaucon's like, well, we won't hold it against you. Just tell us, we're sick about hearing other people's opinions. We've got you here. We want to hear your opinion. That's kind of roughly brings us to the point where Socrates starts to explain what the good is, and lo and behold, he goes to another analogy.
He loves the old analogy, but he doesn't even say you explain the good. He's like, I'll explain the child of the good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's like, I can't actually tell you what it is, but I can tell you something close to it. The progeny of the good.
Yeah.
I have to, just before, I've got to give you Glaucon's burn on Socrates, just because I know, Rubes, I can't believe you didn't call it out, because it's always funny. Because where he's sort of saying that, more or less, like, this is Socrates. I said, I knew all along that a fastidious gentleman like you would not be contented with the thoughts of other people about these matters.
Yeah,
True, Socrates. But I must say that one who, like you, has passed a lifetime of study in philosophy should not be always repeating the opinions of others and never telling his own.
Which they've called him out on that about 3 times already.
Yeah. It's a cracker. But I thought it was kind of funny, or somewhat ironic, that Glaucon's so desperate that he's asking for an opinion from Socrates after they just go on saying that there's no knowledge in an opinion. So why do you want an opinion for? It's not the truth,
Yeah.
Yeah, Socrates does kind of say, he sort of, I don't know, it feels a bit cheap, but he's kind of like, we don't have scope within this argument for me to go into what the good is. I could explain it to you, but it'll take too long, kind of thing. So I don't know, but
I think he sort of said something like, I can only give you like a part truth. So we can't give you the whole. So if we're going to get the whole, that's a whole big deal, right? So let's just
let's keep it simple, stupid, is what he's saying.
Let's keep it simple. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you're right. He offers to define the nature of good as a child as down payment, is the way that he put it. We'll get to the goodness in its whole, but let's just use this as the down payment on my investment, and I'll pay you back.
Yeah.
Well, I can read a little bit here.
Can we start talking about sight and light? Who wants to talk about this? Because I must admit, I'm a bit all over the place on these topics.
The sight and light analogy.
The simile of the sun, my book labels it.
Yep.
Simile of the sun, that sounds nice. When I thought of these spheres things, it made me think of Destiny 1.
That's later, though.
Yeah, but it made me think of Destiny 1. Because they've got the Symphony of the Spheres was the album that came out on vinyl, and I have that.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, "Ooh, that's a cool image."
But for anyone who's still listening, the simile of the sun is somewhat complex, but it's got nothing on the Symphony of the Spheres that Tim was talking about, which comes afterwards. So
I'm going to have a go at explaining the sun, and you can laugh at my stupidity. So. I think what Socrates is saying is the sun shines light on things so you can see it, but it does not make sight itself. But without it, sight has a problem because you can't see things without them having light on them. Is that kind of right?
In the darkness, things are not clear. So you can't see everything, and it's there's no color, I think he sort of says, and you can't see the definition of what something is clearly.
So in this analogy, the sun is the good. That's what we're saying, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the greater
And
good.
then the objects that you see in the light of the sun are the virtues that they were talking about. So justice and temperance and all that gear.
Following.
So he's saying you need the good to see those virtues. Is that roughly what he's saying?
Yes,
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
but that they're not.
Um,
But that the good isn't the virtue itself.
Yes, that's
yeah.
right. But you can't
I've
see
got
those virtues without the light of the good.
Yeah.
yeah. I've got a little quote. And the soul is like the eye. When resting upon that on which truth and being shine, the soul perceives and understands and is radiant with intelligence. But when turned towards the twilight of becoming and perishing, then she has opinion only and goes blinking about and is first of one opinion and then of another and seems to have no intelligence.
Yep.
He starts off with this is as he's trying to get a bit more specific to make it clear because Glaucon's not quite following either.
Yeah.
So this is as he's
Well,
starting to get into the detail.
I, this could be totally wrong for anyone that's listening, but this is the way that I think it works. I think if you had to rationalize it, you've got these ideas of things like virtue or temperance or courage. Now, if those things themselves are not good, then they cease to be virtues. So, unless you can perceive things like courage or temperance or whatever, unless you can perceive them in the light of as being good, then you can't actually understand them fully. That's the way I kind of understand it. It's sort of like what would be an example? An example would be, um, say, courage. Um, you could probably be courageous and do the wrong thing.
Hmm.
So let's say you could courageously rob a bank. That would take courage. But but that would be like taking that virtue and using it for evil. So unless you have good, this higher order virtue that shines light on courage to show what courage ought to be, then you can't really understand what courage is.
That's a
Um,
really good
that
explanation. I like that.
that might be way off, but what got me onto thinking that was because I've heard other intellectually type peoples smarter than us, like Hoyps, so that there's a debate around courage. So yeah, you can use courage for bad or good, but it's still courage. So is it courage if you use it to do the wrong thing, or is it only courage if you use it to do the right thing? And apparently,
Hmm.
there's a bit of a debate as to which side of the fence you fall on. For me, looking at the way that Socrates approaches it would be to say that, well, no, it's not, because unless you're using courage to do something that's good, unless you look at it within the light of the good, then you don't fully understand it. And if you don't fully understand it, then you're not really doing it, kind of thing. That's the way I see it, anyway.
Well, because
That
I
could be
guess
way off.
he's still got the lens of justice on there in what he's trying to sort of steer towards as well. So I guess you know you've got to understand that what is good in order to understand justice, right?
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is, if you think about it practically, does anyone does anyone do anything willingly or accept anything willingly if it's not good? I mean, they might do something that's not good for them, but at the time
Hmm.
they're doing it because they think it's good. I'm not sure about that one. I don't know whether that's probably conflating the terms, but I mean, does anyone intentionally do something that's bad for them?
Oh, for sure.
How so?
Well, but it means like
Smoking.
by what's bad for them.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm getting us into the weeds.
No, but this, I mean, yeah, this is a whole nother show. But the the how can I talk about this? This is addressed by that Bishop Barron guy when he debated, well, not debated, but was interviewed by Jordan Peterson, and they had a debate about the nature of good and evil. And Peterson thought that good and evil were forces at war against each other, and the bishop thought that evil was just good corrupted, and that those doing evil are still seeking a good. It's just a corrupted understanding of what is good. So, for example, smoking. The good you see in it when you smoke it is it makes me feel relaxed. So I'm doing that thing for my good, but someone observing me doing it who understands the harm it does to me sees that I'm not doing something good, because they can see that I'm smoking and that that's bad for my health. So I'm not deciding I'm going to have a cigar because it's bad for my health. I'm deciding I'm having a cigar because I enjoy a cigar and it makes me feel good. So it's still pursuit of good, but it's not maybe the best good. Because the best good would be to look after your body and not do that to yourself. But you replace that good with a corrupt good. Is that kind of making sense?
Yeah, that's roughly the way I see it. I don't think anyone does anything if they don't think it's good in some capacity. And they could be wrong about what's good. But, this is probably pretty dark. But even somebody who ends their own life, which I think we'd all agree is a bad thing, when they do it, they're doing it because they perceive that as a greater good than continuing to live.
Yeah, that there's a good outcome of it, that it ends suffering or it does something. Yeah, I perceive. I understand what you're saying.
So I don't know whether that even ties into what Socrates is saying, but that's the way. That's the only way I could make any sense in my head. I'm just like, there has to be a higher thing that's good, and none of these other virtues fully make sense unless they are good, or you see them in the light of what is good.
I think it does make sense, because I think he's saying you need to, and he's even saying I don't really have my head around what the ultimate good is, which I think is a sensible thing to say. But I think he's saying if you could conceive what is the ultimate good and understand what is the ultimate good, then everything else is applied correctly.
Well, this is cheating because I didn't come up with this idea at all. But I've heard his concept of the good being, it's essentially a description of God without the personal aspect. So it's God without a person. It's like a perfect thing, but without a personality, if that makes sense.
So what the essence of godliness?
Yeah,
That's a good way of saying
it's the essence of God, but without the personal nature of it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I don't know whether that's a reasonable way to describe it, but it would be interesting if it was, because we're talking about Socrates, who, by all accounts, doesn't appear to have read the Bible, obviously before Jesus, all that sort of gear. And that idea of a personal God is something that comes up later on in Christianity, or a singular personal God. I mean, they've got their concept of all these multiple gods, but he's sort of rejected that earlier on.
He has, yeah. There's actually, several times through here where he still sort of seems to refer to a single God, which does make it interesting. Look, I think you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head there, Rubes. I must admit, like, I was sort of leaning the same way, and he does sort of mention some other stuff there. I think where they're sort of like trying to aspire to, it's always trying to sort of hit those heights of, like, aiming for the God level rather than the human level. And I think this just kind of speaks to that sort of philosophy that he's sort of working towards as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel comfortable that do we need to summarize the sun analogy at all, or are we happy with that?
No, I think that's good. I
think we move on before we confuse ourselves.
I do want to throw in that Glaucon geeks out when he mentions the good. He's like, what do you mean something bigger and better? He's like, don't stop, tell us more.
Yeah, it's like he's hitting the next episode button on Netflix.
It gives was it a quick little quote he had in there? In like manner, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge to all things known, but of their being and essence. And yet the good is not essence, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. And that's where Glaucon's all agog and wants to hear more about its likeness to the sun. So
Yeah, it gets pretty excited.
he's fanboying hard. This is kind of where Socrates starts to talk about a sort of another sort of angle about imagining the two ruling powers, one ruling by the intellectual, so the intelligible or understood world, and the other by the visible world.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is
this
where it gets crazy.
It gets dense. Yeah, like this, and this section is like 2 pages or something, and it's just like, what? So Timmy linked a couple of YouTube videos that were supposed to break it down and make it a bit simpler, which helped in some capacity. I don't even know the best way to make a run at it, but what he talks from here on is basically, what it sounds to me like, is different levels of knowledge and the type of reasoning that you use to attain that knowledge. That's kind of what I think it is. That's about as best as I can explain it.
Can I try and explain how I see it in my mind's eye, and then you can tell me how?
Yeah, give us your middle-aged dumbass.
Okay.
So because we're all middle-aged dumbasses here,
so you guys know I love a spreadsheet. And this, when I read it...
Oh, here we go. No one said anything about a spreadsheet.
When I was reading it, I could see in my mind, 4 columns. I'm like, right. Ooh. So I think, and I'm probably way off, but I think what it is there's, column A and column B could be 2 columns representing physical things, and then C and D are non-physical things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the physical things, I think, is not too complicated to explain. And we're going to use the analogy of drifting from Falls of 4, because we've all been playing that and doing drifting. So in the physical columns, you have a real, we'll call it a Dodge Charger, drifting on a road sideways. And then you have a Xbox game of an image of that car drifting. So one is the physical object. So we'll just talk about the car. One is a physical object of the car, and the other one is a picture of the physical object of the car. Is that making sense so far?
Yep.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
Then there is the concept of a Dodge car in the mind.
Drifting
a Dodge car. But then there's a greater concept of just car or drifting.
The essence.
The essence of drifting. Yeah.
I would alter that to say the essence of drifting is showing extreme skill and control. The essence of skillfulness or control.
The essence of controlled out of controlness.
Of imposing order on the chaos.
Yeah. So but does that make sense? Is that kind of right?
Yeah. I think
I think so.
So there's physical and non-physical. The object, the car. So what would this fit into? I'm holding up a Matchbox type model car of a Triumph Stag. I would say this is a column B. So it's not the real thing, it's a representation of the real thing.
So he would call that a shadow, an image, or an illusion.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's kind of a B2. Because you're seeing an image of the model car.
Look, Socrates didn't have
car.
YouTube, okay?
This is true.
Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
But this is a yellow Triumph Stag. And so, yeah, I'd say that's a column B, because there's a real Triumph Stag that this represents. But then someone had the idea of a Triumph Stag, and then behind that was the idea of unreliability.
No, that was the reality, Tim.
Oh, true. Sorry.
Yeah, look, I think it kind of comes back to what he was saying a couple of chapters back, where you've got these different levels of reality, and the particular, which is the physical thing, the particular or the individual object is just an example that points towards the ultimate reality, which is the form itself or the thing itself. So the
Okay.
highest order knowledge being the form, and then under that you've got the lower levels of knowledge, the knowledge of the object itself, and then an even lower level of knowledge, which is just like a reflection or a representation of the object. Look, I'm sure it's a hell of a lot deeper than that, but that's about as good as I could get. Because he does kind of go into, what is it? Not inferences. He goes into supposing things, and he's kind of saying that mathematics supposes premises and then operates on them without justifying those premises. And he's like, that's kind of not quite the highest level of knowledge, because above that is the form itself. Just to try to simplify that as best as I can, he talks about geometry. So he's like, you have geometry, you have a triangle, and there are certain premises that they just presume, which are that 180 degrees makes up all the angles. And he's like, so below the lowest version of that would be an actual triangle in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, but then the higher level knowledge of that triangle, they presuppose these rules. And then he says there's an even higher level of knowledge, which would be the perfect triangle. Because when you're talking about or describing a triangle, you're not actually just describing that triangle in real life. What you're describing with those rules is the actual concept of a triangle. Look, I'm sorry, that's
But so he's saying what you don't do is go, well, is the line that makes the triangle actually a line, and is the measurement of inches actually correct? Like he's saying, you don't dismantle those things. Is that kind of what he's pointing out as well?
Well, I guess he's saying you can't dismantle those things because they're not real. I mean, they're real, but they're not. He says they're real, but they're not the physical object themselves. Because the physical object themselves is the particular. And he keeps banging on about, if you're obsessed with the particulars, it's not real knowledge. He's
Yeah.
kind of saying, well, the real knowledge is that perfect concept of a triangle that exists in the realm of forms.
Yeah, and I mean, and how can you prove that? Or you can't. You've just got to accept that that's a concept, I
Yeah.
think, and go with it. Yeah.
Yeah, look, that's something that's what I found a little bit funny about it, is he kind of talks about mathematical reasoning, which I think in our current society we would essentially say that mathematical reasoning is about as certain as you can be about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he kind of downgrades that to the second from the top and says, well, you've got to presuppose things to make mathematical reasoning, so there must be a higher level knowledge. But you've got to presuppose that higher level of knowledge even exists, because you can't access it. I mean, he thinks you can, through long study, you can perceive it, but like, how do you
Or
prove
is
it?
he
Like you
saying
say,
that, that the person who's invented that mathematics had that higher order knowledge in order to, I don't know.
well, exactly. Well, no, actually, you've nailed it, because that's exactly what he says in one of his other dialogues.
Yeah.
He talks about learning as recollection. He doesn't
Yeah.
think you're creating something new. He thinks that knowledge is there, and when you learn, you're actually recalling something that exists. So it's different from the way we think about it these days. And spoiler alert: a couple of thousand years later, you've got a couple of philosophers like Locke, and I think maybe Hobbes, or that mob, that sort of that era, that basically take the opposite stance to Socrates and say, no, these things don't exist per se in some realm of forms. They're things that we just perceive in the particulars, and um, we extract, or we infer their existence from the particulars. But if there's particulars didn't exist, then that form wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of recall there was some example there they were talking about, if it was like, well, let's stick with the example of a car. like you couldn't have imagined a car if you didn't have a car to see first to kind of imagine it from, if you know what I mean. It's kind of that bit of that
Yeah,
chicken and the egg kind of situation. So how can you have had that higher order thinking if it didn't exist yet?
yeah, yes, exactly.
Do you think that's why engines are measured through horsepower? Because we started off with chariots pulled by horses.
I
For
can
sure.
assume so.
It's plausible.
I'm pretty certain that's true, because you might have a big cart and you need 4 horses to pull it. So that one's got 4 horsepower, mate.
That's right. That's right. Well, Glaucon kind of summarizes it at the end.
Yep.
Yeah, he's got a summary there, but it didn't help me.
Well,
But yeah,
I'll
let's
read
read it.
it.
It'll be
I'll
fun.
read it, and then we'll see what we make of it. So he says, "I understand you," he replied, "not perfectly,
Yeah, right.
for you seem to me to be describing a task which is really tremendous. But at any rate, I understand you to say that knowledge and being, which the science of dialectic contemplates, are clearer than the notions of the arts, as they are termed, which proceed from hypothesis only. These are also contemplated by the understanding and not by the senses. Yet because they start from hypothesis and do not ascend to a principle, those who contemplate them appear to you not to exercise the higher reason upon them, although when a first principle is added to them, they are cognizable by the higher reason. And the habit which is concerned with geometry and the cognate sciences, I suppose that you would term understanding and not reason, as being intermediate between opinion and reason. You have quite conceived my meaning, I said, and now, corresponding to these 4 divisions, let there be 4 faculties in the soul: reason answering to the highest, understanding to the second, faith or conviction to the third, and perception of shadows to the last. And let there be a scale of them, and let us suppose that the several faculties have clearness in the same degree that their objects have truth. I understand, he replied, and give my assent and accept your arrangement.
He doesn't get it.
That's complicated.
No. Look, from what I can tell, though, this is setting up the next book, and in the next book is apparently something called Plato's Cave, another analogy, believe it or not. But
Shocking.
that's supposed to be like one of the most famous passages in all of philosophy. So I'm hoping that maybe when we hook into that next week, it'll start to make a bit more sense.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it makes me nervous because, having a look at other podcasts that are around for this book, I've stumbled across quite a few that only deal with the cave. And there's like months worth of conversations about it. And I just saw that and went, what? So I'm pretty sure that whatever we do, it'll be pretty rudimentary.
Yeah. We're middle-aged men. We've got to just keep it simple.
We haven't got time to muck around.
Yeah, leave that for the young. They think they've got their whole lives ahead of them. We're halfway. We're just like, no, we ain't got time for this.
Exactly. Well, that was good. I'm looking at my book, right? I know we're only just finished chapter 6. I think it's given me false hope because when I look at the thickness of my book, we're like 2/3 of the way through.
No. You'd have notes at the end. Don't be like that. There'd be like all sorts of notes and stuff right at the end, right?
No. But my point is, we're only 60% through the books, but the thickness of the book looks like we're 75% through. So
You can't judge a book by its thickness, bro.
that is very true.
Mine looks a little bit more, but this is the rest of mine with the appendix minus the appendix.
Yeah, okay.
This is not working.
I see. So it's roughly the same. It's like less than 1/3.
Yeah, all right.
We will see.
You are right about not judging books by its thickness. I read all the Twilight books, and that would be like
You did what?
3 inches high. I did.
I'm surprised, Tim.
Well, I saw this meme the other day, and it's exactly right. If you remove Bella and Shovelface from the story, and I pitch this story. Ready? So a sheriff at a small town discovers that there are vampires and wolves in his town, and he goes out with his shotgun to try and take out the bad vampires with the werewolves. That's a mad story. You just remove Bella and Edward from it, and you've got a mad story. It's like suddenly you've got this redneck sheriff vampire hunter. It's friggin' sweet.
I didn't know you did that to yourself. It explains so much.
Wow.
If you had told me that before you got me into this podcast, I probably wouldn't have showed up. Like, I don't know if I can respect you anymore.
Wow. Wow.
Harsh judge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't Team Edward, so I'll give you that much.
I don't know which side of the teams they're on, mate. That's how far removed I am.
Oh, dude. Look, as far as if you have to get brownie points with the Mrs. watching a chick flick, it isn't the worst ones out there. Just saying. There are worse.
If you tell me you've read The Handmaid's Tale as well, I'm gonna hang up.
I have not.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. No, that's
It's
not
hard
a
to
thing.
find good friends these days.
Well, speaking of good friends, let's journey on down to the pub for lots of us.
Absolutely. But this is going to continue on in a similar vein, isn't it, Tim?
Well, it might. So we went and saw this play, which was called Come From Away. And I thought it was going to be a bashing from some SJWs about
Why did
many
you think
things.
that, Tim? What was it supposed to be about? What was the write-up?
There was
Why did you think
there was a paragraph I read in a review, which I'll read out for you shortly, which just made me go, oh, really? This is what we're going to do with our time? So, where is it? Here we go. So it says, the story doesn't shy away from harsher truths. Details such as the gay couple terrified of being out in a small town, or the African passengers who think that the Salvation Army are soldiers, or passengers brawling in a phone queue, generate prickles of realism, and we see in the composite character Ali, an Arabic chef, the beginnings of the Islamophobia that has since become one of the defining stains of the 21st century. So I read this and I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit preachy, isn't it? But, so it's set in a place in Canada, as 9/11 happens. Yeah, as 9/11 happens, and the population of the town overnight doubles or triples because they have like 30-something massive planes filled with people diverted to their airport, because it used to be the biggest airport in the world back when planes couldn't make it from Europe to America in one trip. They would stop at this island, at this massive airport, and then fill up and keep going. And but once planes got the range, it just became almost completely unused. So when the emergency happened, they just diverted everybody there. So then the town responded by, setting up all of the schools and halls as accommodation. They closed the hockey ring and turned it into a massive indoor fridge to store all the food and everything in for everybody. And everybody who was there, like the play portrayed, that they just fell in love with the town and the people's generosity, and they couldn't believe how nice everybody was. And it was actually really different to what I thought it would be based on that review, because the gay couple, for example, were welcomed. Once they revealed that they were gay, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, cool, my uncle's gay and this person's gay," and someone else goes, "Yeah, there must be something in the water," and another guy in the pub's like, "That's why I only drink beer," and they were like, "Yeah, whatevs, who cares?" And but I was particularly surprised by the Salvation Army bit, because they had the African family on a bus traveling at night, and they don't know where they are. They've landed and been stuck in a plane for 28 hours, and then everyone gets taken off, with guards and everything, because they're concerned about terror threats, and they're getting told to get off the bus, and they won't get off. And the guy from the Salvos spots the Bible, realizes that the chapters and verses and book order would be the same as his Bible, asks to take the Bible from the lady, turns to a Bible verse in the New Testament which says, "Be anxious about nothing," and then points to it because they can't speak their language. And the people read the Bible verse and then they're like, "Oh, sweet as," and they hop off the bus and trust these people because of that 4-word Bible verse.
Well, that's
And
clever.
yeah, and I was just like, wow. And they used the Bible to actually talk to these people. So they would look up verses in the English Bible to try and explain roughly what they're trying to do, and then point to that one in their one, so then they could go, "Oh, okay, I guess it's time to eat," or something like that. So it was really cool.
Sacrificed at Herod's temple. What?
So yeah, it was not at all what I thought it would be. It was surprisingly sensible, and it was very generous to the people who had faith in that town, and it was a really nice story actually. So I wouldn't say like go buy tickets and go see it, but if you are gonna see it, you'll probably like it. It was
Yeah,
good.
look, I mentioned to you I had another mate of mine who'd gone and seen it with his wife, and yeah, said it was quite good. So I thought you'd be all right.
Yeah, I thought you were giving me false hope, but it was
No.
good. And then we had Korean barbecue afterwards, so it was a good day.
There you go.
What did you guys get up
Keeps you
to?
happy, buddy. We've had Halloween Fest going on this weekend, so we had all the cousins and my mother-in-law and all that sort of stuff over, and the kids all dressed up and tore around. So we actually did that yesterday, though, which was the Saturday rather than Halloween itself, just because it lined up better with everyone's timetables. So
Nice.
that was good. I spent the day doing a bit of gardening beforehand, and pretty chilled weekend.
Did you dress up as anybody? Like, did you decide to be Thrashy Marcus or something?
No, I didn't this time around. I should have, but I was a bit slack and didn't do it. But it seems to get bigger every year. So I was saying to Rubes before we sort of got online. I think we had probably maybe 100 kids come up to the front door this afternoon, early evening, and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
We
getting to
had
be a bit of a thing.
we had 50 or so individually wrapped treats, and we ran out by like 7 p.m. There's heaps around
Yep.
here too. I was really surprised. Usually, every other year it's been 30, and you'd have leftovers. But there's just heaps out today.
Yeah, I mean, we hadn't really sort of had much of this before because our old place was in a battle axe, and so people would just never come down. And since we've moved, yeah, I guess because you're on the street now, so
Yeah, people can
it's just
see
a
your
lot
door.
more people coming. Yeah, it's funny because like I think like we more or less just about sort of run out of lollies, and we're putting the kids to bed. It's like I don't want anyone sort of knocking on the door now, so I like literally like took down some of the stuff that was out the front that sort of like was obviously letting people know that it was a house for Halloween or whatever.
Yeah.
And even after I took all that down and turned the lights out the front, people were still knocking on the door.
Oh well.
I was
Yeah,
like,
that's funny.
I've literally got about 4 things left in this bowl. Here you go. Anyway, it's good fun. Kids are all fine, and I have to say, really pleasantly surprised. Lots of like really well mannered kids, all very gracious and use their manners and stuff, which was nice to see too.
Oh, good stuff.
I wonder if lockdowns contributed to that a bit. Like they're more grateful that they can be out and about and doing these types of things.
Yeah, that's a good
maybe.
point.
I'm not sure. Could be.
How about you, Ruben? What did you get up to?
Not a great deal. Church this morning and then home again. I've had the new car for about 2 weeks now, so I can tell you that I'm not disappointed in the purchase. Really, really enjoying it.
Awesome.
That's good. I've seen it in the flesh, and it's a beast. It's very nice, and I sat in it. It's very comfortable.
Yeah.
So I definitely see the appeal. I
I
reckon
did
it's
have some.
probably as comfortable as your old Statesman.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I did have someone say to me that when they saw the new car, they said that that car suits you. That's kind of that's you. I don't know whether it's because it's so big and fat. I took it as a compliment anyway because I like it. I've never had a brand new car before. This is the first time I bought a brand new car in my entire life, so I'm enjoying it.
Yeah,
So I gave it a wash. I gave it a wash and a chamois today, and took a great deal of pride in doing it. So
Yeah.
Very nice, very nice.
Excellent.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So, for those of you listening, thanks for joining us. And remember, the Republic wasn't built in a day, and neither are middle-aged men. And we'll catch you guys next time. See you soon.
See ya.